All right. Hey, welcome back to the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness Project podcast. I really appreciate you being here for another episode with us. If it's not your first, if it is your first, even better. I'm really glad you're here. Trying something new today, and I'm actually really excited about it. So I had the idea of going through pop culture things, movies, television shows, maybe even books, movies, that kind of thing, or music, and looking at what they portray as far as preparedness, disasters, emergencies, empowerment, things like that, things that are important to you and to me and fit in with the function and purpose of the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness Project. This is the first episode of what I'm calling Pop Culture Preparedness. That may change, may not, I don't know, we'll see. But I thought it would be good for this first episode to do something that would really just kind of fit the bill, really obviously, and that most people are probably pretty familiar with. And so we're starting off today with the first episode of The Walking Dead. So season 1, episode 1, entitled Days Gone By. Before I get to that though, why zombies? Why are we talking about zombies with preparedness? This is actually a question that's been around for a little while. Because when The Walking Dead first came out, soon after that, like 2012-ish, CDC did a tie-in thing about zombie preparedness. And so ever since, that's been kind of the thing that others have done. The CDC campaign has expired. They're not doing it anymore. I couldn't even find most of the information about it on their website. But other agencies, other companies still do talk about zombie preparedness. But to quote from the Wikipedia article about CDC's zombie campaign, says the whole idea was if you're prepared for a zombie apocalypse, you're prepared for pretty much anything. The CDC's blog post included precautionary tips about zombies, along with its usual tips for preparing an emergency kit, as well as emergency escape routes in case of an earthquake or hurricane. After explaining how the public should be prepared, if zombies started appearing outside your doorstep, it continues, you can also implement this plan if there's a flood, earthquake, or other emergency. Plan your evacuation route. When zombies are hungry, they won't stop until they get food, i.e. brains, which means you need to get out of town fast. Plan where you would go and multiple routes you would take ahead of time so that the flesh eaters don't have a chance. This is also helpful when natural disasters strike and you have to take shelter fast. After a few days, the number of followers for this campaign on social media reached 1.2 million, which is 100 times the initial number. And Mr. Daigle commented that the number of followers of the CDC's zombie apocalypse tweets was comparable to the number of followers of the royal wedding of their Royal Highnesses William and Catherine. So that's some pretty good reach. And so, like I said, others have done similar things talking about zombie preparedness. It's been a great way to get people interested in preparedness, as well as, just talking about it and getting it into people's minds and into the zeitgeist. So that's why zombies. It really, when it comes to zombie preparedness, like they said, you're prepared for pretty much anything. Zombie preparedness, you could be talking about sheltering in place inside your home. You could be talking about evacuating, being on the run. If you're familiar with the Walking Dead, you see different people doing those at different times, whether they're evacuating or sheltering in place. You see people who are hungry, who have food, who are, worried about different things, who have to defend themselves. There's just a lot, like almost any part of preparedness can be easily incorporated into a zombie preparedness plan. So that is the reason it's caught on and has stuck around, even though, like I said, the CDC is no longer doing their campaign. I did want to mention, since we're talking about zombies, zombies traditionally like to eat brains. Obviously depends on the kind of zombie we're talking about, but zombies traditionally, stereotypically like brains. Personally, I like Magic Mind. 2-ounce bottle, I've talked about it before. Magic Mind is an awesome product. I'm not sure if it would make your brain more or less appetizing or tasty to a zombie. I don't think they've looked into that yet. I would be interested to see what they come up with there. I guess maybe it depends on the zombie's taste buds. One of the things that they have in here is different types of mushrooms. So I guess, if you're the type of person who liked mushrooms before you became a zombie, you may still really like it. If you didn't care for mushrooms, you may not care for a brain that's been enhanced by magic mind. So there's the cordyceps mushrooms and lion's mane that help with your mental faculties, help you be able to think quicker on your feet. I actually really like the fact that there's honey in here. Honey is a sweetener, but it's actually a really healthy thing. If you look into the health benefits of honey, there are a ton of them. And even if it's not a direct health benefit, there's a lot of good that comes from bees and from the process of making honey. I like to have a little bit of honey in my tea. I've never thought to add honey to this because it's already got it in there. Magic Mind really makes a difference for me in how I'm feeling mentally, feeling more awake, alert, a little bit more alacrity mentally. And I know that it can do the same for you. So if you're interested in Magic Mind and seeing what kind of benefits it will have for you, and who knows, maybe you help us figure out whether zombies like Magic Mind or not. Hopefully it won't come to that, but if it does, I'd be interested to see a study on it. Let me know what your experience is with Magic Mind or with zombies, or both zombies eating your brains after Magic Mind. So if you're interested in trying Magic Mind, you can use a coupon code that I have for you. Enjoy bringing that to you. Enjoy being able to offer you value. That's why I do this. So you can go to www.magicmind.co. That's magicmind.co/LLPHP, and enter coupon code LLPHP20 at checkout, and that will get you 20% off of your first purchase, which is a no-brainer, a good deal. Magic Mind, great thing. Brains, good things. Well-functioning brains, awesome things. As I said, zombies in Walking Dead don't eat brains necessarily. I'm sure they could if they wanted to, but I don't recall them really being shown doing that. But at first, we're still getting used to what zombies are, what they're doing. So I'm gonna break down the episode now. I'm gonna start from the beginning. I know a lot of you have probably seen it. Walking Dead has been very popular over its run, although I think it has declined in popularity, as a lot of shows often do. I definitely don't hear about it as much from people, but it's still good stuff. I really enjoy it. I've missed a couple of more recent seasons, so once it's over, I'm going to go back on Netflix and binge the whole thing. So I look forward to that. So like I said, I'm going to kind of recap the episode. I'm going to go beat by beat with the story and talk about the different examples of being prepared or not being prepared. I found going through the first episode, there's a lot more not being prepared than there was prepared, which makes sense. It makes for more drama that way for the most part. Timeline-wise, I'm actually a little bit disappointed with it. I'll get to that in a minute. So it starts off with Rick pulling up in his car, stopping in an intersection. There's no power, no people, just several crashed, burned cars, trucks. After a minute, he goes and gets a gas can and then starts heading down the hill to the gas station. Finds when he gets there, there's a sign posted saying there's no gas. So from a preparedness perspective, either he didn't have a supply of gas or he ran out and didn't have enough gas. So when we're talking about preparedness, one of the things we need to consider when we're thinking about evacuating is, do we have enough gas for our vehicles, or diesel, or whatever type of vehicle we have? If you've got an electric vehicle, how are we going to charge that? There obviously are charging stations out there. There's a lot fewer of them than there are gas stations. So definitely something to consider in your emergency planning is whether you have enough fuel to have a good chance of escaping where you're at. Generally, the advice is to keep at least half a tank of gas in your car. Fill up once you get to half a tank, in other words. And then, it's really beneficial to have an extra supply of fuel, a couple extra cans somewhere you can put in there if you need to. He gets to the gas station, sees the sign says no gas, and maybe I was being observant, but it's at this point that I really realized that there was no audio, no sound really at all, other than some really quiet nature sounds, until you begin hearing some quiet footsteps. And so Rick turns and sees a little girl, and he starts approaching her, not realizing that she is a zombie. She turns, starts to chase after him, and he shoots her in the head. So, preparedness point, Rick was not as not as aware of the situation as he could have been, but at least he was prepared to defend himself. So kind of a negative, but a plus as well. So, that was kind of a wash. If he'd been a little bit more aware, he probably would have noticed that the girl was a zombie before she turned and started going and chasing after him or running towards him. And so at that point, after he shoots the zombie girl, we roll opening credits. Come back from the credits and right into a flashback. And so Rick and his deputy Shane are sitting in their cruiser talking about women. Shane's rather misogynistic. I really don't like the character throughout the entire show, as long as he's around, basically because of this attitude that he has, and is just a prime example of it here in this scene. So Shane's rather misogynistic, but it's kind of locker room talk, kind of just joking about, women and men are different, and men are better, and we don't understand women, and that kind of thing. Like I said, it's all kind of demeaning, kind of locker room talk. Very good old boy, considering it's set in the South. None of it's empowering at all, which is unfortunate. I guess more unfortunate is the fact that that's really how a lot of conversations go and how a lot of people think. So they get a call on the radio. They run code. That means lights and sirens. And they lead on a spike strip. The car they're trying to stop runs over the spike strip. Tires are blown out and the car flips. 2 suspects get out of the car and there's a shootout that ensues. Pretty quickly, Rick and Shane are able to kill the suspects. And then to shoot them. We're assuming they're dead. Or rather, Rick and Shane are assuming they're dead. Anyway, they start talking, not paying attention to what's going on. While they're being inattentive, a third suspect comes out of the car and shoots Rick. This actually really bothers me, especially considering some of our current events over the last 2 years. So number one, huge lack of situational awareness. To put it in just basic safety terms, one of the things that is really important that you learn when you're doing first aid training is to make sure the scene is safe. Yes, that's specific in a way to first aid, but it really should be something that is general through life. If you're going to go somewhere, if you're going to do something, make sure you're safe doing it. They made the assumption that the 2 suspects they shot were dead, which they may have been, but they didn't even think to check for a third one. And so Rick ends up getting shot. They didn't check to see if the suspects that they shot, whether they're alive or dead. Technically, they have, as we saw with the Derek Chauvin case with George Floyd, police have a duty to render aid. So they really should have gone and checked on the people that they'd shot and checked to see, is this person alive? Is this person dead? Generally speaking, you have to be a medical professional of some sort to declare whether someone is dead or not. I'm not sure how well that applies to police, sheriffs, deputies, those types of individuals, but generally speaking, a layperson can't diagnose that. So assume the person is alive unless it's just blatantly obvious that they are no longer living. They had a moral obligation, possibly even a legal obligation, to check on those people and render aid if that was needed. So that really bothers me that they didn't, to be honest. And then the fact that it compounded into not paying attention to the situation, Rick getting shot, to me, that's just inexcusable and just a mess that they could have pretty easily avoided. Then again, I am not in any way affiliated with law enforcement. I've never been on a ride along. I've never done any of that. So this is me coming from my armchair looking at the situation. So things could be very different when you are actually a trained law enforcement professional. The episode picks up again with Shane visiting Rick in the hospital. Rick's pretty out of it. And then he comes to, we're assuming days later. I don't remember if it actually ever indicates how long specifically, but it's probably been days, if not maybe a couple weeks, was the impression I got. His flowers are dead. The clock in his room is not working. It's dead as well. The medical equipment in his room is off. Phones are out. The lights are flickering. They're on intermittently. Some places have light, some don't. The hospital's deserted. He wanders around trying to figure out what's going on. And that's where he comes across his first zombie. Not the first one we see in the episode, or excuse me, first victim of a zombie. So first one we see in the episode, first one timeline-wise, and of the story of The Walking Dead. Again, this is something else that really bothers me. I know it's important and like it makes sense plot wise, but the fact that Rick was left there when assumedly the hospital personnel evacuated, it's not clear whether some got away or not, or whether they tried to evacuate. But a little bit of history, real world history. I think it was 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people that were really seriously impacted with Hurricane Katrina. There were a lot of people that died that really did not need to die. One of the things that they found was that many medical professionals and care providers, by care providers, I'm talking about like group homes, retirement homes, things like that. The staff pretty much just up and left the people that they were supposed to be supporting. And so a lot of the people that died had been in those situations where they were supposed to be getting support from other people, and people just left them. After that, there was a pretty concerted effort by the federal government, as well as the states, to make sure that people understand that as a care provider, as a medical professional, you have a duty to take care of those people that you're there to take care of. You don't get to just leave if something happens, if there's a disaster. You have a legal and moral responsibility to stay there and take care of those people until you are relieved. And so the fact that Rick wakes up and he's just all alone there kind of bothers me, because this is set, well, I don't know about setting exactly, but the series started in like 2011-ish, and Hurricane Katrina was 2005. So this is a few years after Katrina. Obviously, you're not going to bring in everything from the real world. Still, like I said, bothers me a bit. As he goes down the hall, he sees a door in front of him that has, I'm assuming, spray painted on it, but it's painted regardless. The message, "Don't open, dead inside." And so that's really good communication. I applaud that one. That's points for that. Whoever did that, by painting it just huge letters across the door, you are communicating with anyone who comes after you until that's removed, that there's danger inside. And so that's potentially going to help save lives. It's something that's going to last, it's clear. And so it's really good, effective communication for that situation. Good on whoever did that. Rick is still weak. He's trying to figure out what's going on still. Lighting's intermittent in and out. So at times he has to use matches to provide a little bit of light. I don't remember if they show where he actually gets the matches from, but even still, it's a good example of redundancy, of having something to be a backup in case your primary thing fails. So the primary thing was the lighting, the electrical lighting, that was failing. So he had a backup, he had a redundancy to have the matches. Where it's possible, I really encourage having redundancies in your planning so that you can have a backup. That way, if something happens, you're not out of luck. So Rick exits the hospital and finds a lot of bodies wrapped up in what looks like probably sheets. Could be like zipper bags. They don't get super close to be able to tell. But outside the hospital, just kind of laying there all nicely laid out, which shows there were a lot more casualties than the morgue at the hospital could handle, but there was some sort of planning involved, whether they had planned ahead as the employees of the hospital, or whether it was people who came after. There's also military that's there. So it could have been them that came in and started organizing the bodies. Either way, that was important for sanitation. It's important for respect for the people. That was, again, a plus to see that had happened. Obviously not great that they were sitting out in the sun for days and days, but I mean, in that situation, what are you going to do? I mean, they didn't have, obviously, some sort of refrigerator truck or something like that to help keep the bodies cold. They did what they could, and I appreciate that. Like I said, he walks out of the grounds of the hospital. We're kind of pulled back as we see that, and we see that there's been a military presence, and all of the soldiers that are there have been killed as well. So lots of death, and that's kind of going to be a theme through the whole show. Another thing that kind of bothers me a little bit before I go on is that Rick never really takes stock of how he is doing. He wakes up, he pulls out the IV from his arm, and he goes on with doing what he's doing, trying to see what's going on, get out of the hospital, and figure out the situation around him. But he doesn't take stock of how he's doing. He doesn't check on his injuries. He doesn't check to see if he has any pains or any things that are impeding his movement or anything like that. Like he's just like focused, like I'm getting out of here, and doesn't check in on himself, which is a mistake. Being aware of how you are doing, taking care of yourself, providing first aid or medical care for yourself as much as you're able, as well as self-care in general, are all super important things. They're important for health and safety as well as empowerment. And so it's important for you to check in with yourself periodically and see, how am I doing? Am I okay? Is there something I need to do to be healthier, to be happier, to be in a better situation? So Rick starts walking, finds a bicycle, and rides it home only to find his house empty. Lori, his wife, and Carl, his son, are gone, and Rick breaks down and cries. And I actually really appreciate that as well, because that, in a sense, is empowering too. It's important to be in touch with your emotions. I would say people should not generally let their emotions drive them. Their emotions need to be tempered with logic, but you know, it's okay to have your emotions. They're there for a reason. They're an important part of who you are. Whether you're a man, a woman, a child, non-binary, whoever you are, it's okay to have your emotions. It's okay to cry, to grieve, to do those things. It's natural, it's human, and it's okay. And so I really appreciate the fact that they show Rick going through that. We then move on to see Rick going outside. He sits down on the porch, again, not paying attention to his surroundings, and gets whacked in the back of the head with a shovel, knocking him out. Again, a total lack of situational awareness. This guy is a police officer. He's a sheriff's deputy or sheriff. He should know about situational awareness. He should know that he needs to be paying attention, especially after a disaster where he's still trying to figure out what the heck is going on. It's kind of almost post-apocalyptic. You know, you got to take that awareness and you got to like pump it up to 11. And his was at like 3, I think. So a good example of what not to do and how not to be. So Rick wakes up and the boy's father tries to assess the situation, try to figure out how much of a threat Rick might be. He's talking to him. Not the best way to handle things. I feel it's kind of understandable, but definitely not the ideal. But the dad starts threatening Rick and basically saying, you know, if you're a threat, if you try and do anything to me and my son, I'm going to handle it. You know, or I'll kill you if I need to. He's trying to mitigate or reduce the risks to himself and his family, or his son. It's understandable, but really threats, if you can avoid them, are really not the way to go. It's not a positive thing. It's not a situation where you're cooperating or empowering. It's very much a setting up a power struggle and conflict. And so definitely not the best way to do it. Again, situational, you know, post-apocalypse, or during apocalypse. Plus, you know, there's going to be some trauma responses, you know, and so I try and look at that with understanding and compassion. Rick finds out the man's name is Morgan and the son is Dwayne. They're squatting in that home. So Rick goes to the window, and he's kind of checking the place out, maybe getting a little bit of situational awareness. He's warned not to open the blinds because then the walkers, as they call the zombies, I don't think they ever use the word zombies, or at least not at the beginning, will see the light and that'll draw them to the house. Morgan chides himself for using a gun. Again, noise draws the zombies, draws their attention. And so this is a really good example of sheltering in place. Sheltering in place is one of your 2 options, really. If there's an emergency or disaster, you can shelter in place or you can evacuate. Sheltering in place is generally going to be the better choice if it's safe to do so. Even though it's not their home, they're still sheltering there and they're doing what they need to protect themselves from the outside threats. They're keeping the doors closed, they're keeping the blinds closed, trying to minimize the amount of noise, of light, anything that would give away their position, let people know, let zombies know that they're there. They're trying to keep those things to a minimum. And so all those are great practices when you're sheltering in place. So we next see them sharing a meal. Rick and Morgan and Dwayne. And even through all that's happened, they see grace over their meal, which is a little thing in some ways, but that's actually a really important thing, because it's important after disaster as much as possible, especially for children, teenagers, younger people, to keep a sense of normalcy. Normalcy is really important in resiliency and maintaining mental and emotional health and wellness. So they're doing what they can to keep their faith, as well as keep their regular habits, their practices. And so I applaud Morgan for ensuring that his family is doing that, his little family. Morgan then spends some time talking with Rick about the walkers, the risks, people being turned, those sorts of things. So he educates Rick about what's going on. Education is super important. It doesn't have to be formal education, but knowing what's going on in the world around you, kind of a broad situational awareness in a way. Knowing what's going on in the world around you is super important. This is why I mesh and blend all of these things together in the Life, Liberty, Pursuit of Happiness project. It's important that you know what's going on in the world around you, so that you know how to prepare and protect yourself, so that as you're building your best life, it's protected. And so you're able to thrive more. You're better prepared when challenges happen, whether it be an emergency, a disaster, whatever kind of challenge, you're hopefully better able to weather that than someone who is not prepared. So it's a good example of that. We see, or rather we next hear a car alarm go off and Dwayne jumps, and that's an understandable trauma response. Morgan comforts and reassures his son. He's a good dad. He's trying his best to help and support his son through a really traumatic time. People need compassion, no matter who you are, no matter how strong you are or you think you are, or you try to portray to others. Everyone needs love, everyone needs compassion and understanding. So they look out the window and they see the zombie, Dwayne's mother, Morgan's wife, approaching the home. Dwayne starts crying. It's hard for him. I can't imagine what that would be like, not only to have lost your mother, but to have her become a walker or a zombie. To see her every once in a while, just like walking around aimlessly, mindlessly, if you will, just walking around out there. It's going to bring up your memories. It's going to pour lemon juice and salt in your wounds. And so it's a very understandable response to the trauma that Dwayne's having. So Morgan continues to try and reassure him and calm him. Rick goes over to the front door and looks out the peephole and sees the zombie trying to get in. Thankfully, not only is the door closed, but it's locked and it's barricaded. So again, sheltering in place. Sometimes you've got to, well, even when you're not sheltering in place, it's a good safety practice every day to block the doors. Making sure it's harder for people to get into your home is super important when you're sheltering in place, especially if it's a situation where there is civil unrest, rioting, whatever term you want to use. You're keeping intruders out. You're trying to portray that you're not home, because showing that you're home could potentially make you a threat. You're also trying to barricade the home and show as little signs of life and value as you can, so that it's more likely that they will pass over your home. Okay, so the next morning starts off with Rick learning more about how to fight and kill zombies. Again, education, super important, as well as protection and defense. I'm not going to get into that a lot, although there are a couple places it comes up. But it's important for everyone that you have a way of protecting yourself. That's going to be really dependent on who you are, on your personality, on your beliefs and values. But know how you're going to protect yourself and be able to do so effectively. If you choose to use a weapon of some sort, make sure you know how to use it and that you can do so effectively and safely so that you don't end up getting hurt. They talk, Morgan tells Rick about the safe zone in Atlanta, which is also where the CDC headquarters is, the Centers for Disease Control. And so they expect people will be trying to gather there because of the CDC as well as the safe zone. So that's where people are going to go for safety. It's where people are going to try and figure out what's going on with this plague that's infecting so many people. They go over to the police station where there's hot water, which Morgan and Dwayne have not been able to enjoy for a while. Rick tells them that the station has its own water supply and it is able to do its own heating of the water and things. And they are better able to shelter in place in that building than elsewhere because there were preparations made. It was more self-sufficient when it came to water and electricity. So again, self-sufficiency as much as we can, let's be reasonable. Everyone has their own needs and abilities, their own capacities for being able to provide for themselves, being able to be self-sufficient. Let's be real, that takes time and money, or else you're spending a whole lot of one if you don't have the other. And not everyone's willing or able to do that, obviously. After the showers, Rick and Morgan talk some more, and Morgan says they were frozen in place there in that house that they were sheltering in, which I really like, in that the concept of being frozen in place is very different than sheltering in place. Sheltering is more protective. It's taking care of yourself. It's taking care of others. Whereas being frozen in place, that's a fear response. That's not an empowered response. That's not a prepared response. It's not a response in love. It's fear. Fear responses are less healthy. They generally lead to poorer decisions. Fear responses just aren't good responses usually. So it's good that Morgan acknowledges at that point that he was experiencing a fear response rather than an empowerment response. At that point, he decides, okay, we're going to deal with the trauma, we're going to deal with the fear, and we're going to move on in a more empowered way. So they get guns to protect themselves. Dwayne asks for a gun, but before giving one to him, he's taught about gun safety, which I cannot stress enough. If you're going to use a weapon of any kind, make sure you know how to use it safely and you use safe practices. For firearms, that would include gun locks, things like that, that are out there and often not very expensive, but are really important in helping protect people from getting a hold of those that shouldn't have them. He's taught about gun safety so that he knows how to use it. That way he's not going to hurt himself or others, and he can use it effectively. It's really good to see that importance given to firearm safety there. Rick is going to head out to find his family, to search for them in Atlanta. Morgan and Dwayne stay so that they can increase their own preparedness level before they make the same trip. They want to increase their skills with guns. Morgan needs a refresher and Dwayne needs to learn the skills, but also, they need to get themselves right mentally and emotionally as much as they can, get back to a more resilient state where they're not acting out of trauma responses and fear responses, and probably gather some physical supplies as well, I would imagine, some food and things before they set out on the road. So it's good that they recognize their needs were different than Rick's. Rick was a single man on his own. Dwayne and Morgan, two-person family at that point, but still a family. Morgan's being responsible for Dwayne, and they're recognizing that they have different needs. They are in a different situation, even though they're physically in the same place. Their situations are different, and so they're acting according to those individual situations. And I really applaud them, doing that, storyline wise, but also as far as the writing goes, that they consider that and portrayed it. Morgan says to Rick as they're getting ready to leave, "You think ahead." And Rick's response is, "You can't afford not to, not anymore." They're learning that the hard way. The wonderful thing about preparedness is it's proactive. We can get prepared before the emergency or disaster happens. We can plan for it. We can prepare and do what we need to, put things in place, have food storage, have water supplies, have locations identified that we're going to evacuate to, have things in place so that we can make our home more safe and secure if we need to shelter in place in our home. Unfortunately, most people are very complacent when it comes to such things. It goes a little bit to what's called the normalcy bias. I actually talk about that a fair amount. But normalcy bias is essentially the idea that most people are going to believe things are normal as much as they can, even if it kind of goes against the evidence. I talk about that a lot in like first aid situations or emergency situations where you may not want to admit to yourself that the situation is as bad as it is. A lot of people that are having heart attacks or serious medical emergencies, they don't want to believe that they're having a heart attack. And so they will deny it, they will minimize it, say, oh, it's heartburn, or it's this, or it's that. And so they end up putting themselves at greater risk of not surviving that event because they're not taking it seriously. And they're experiencing or implementing that normalcy bias, that things are normal, really, because we don't like things out of the normal. We don't want things to be different. That's just part of human nature. And it's one of those things that doesn't always serve us very well. So a zombie comes, Morgan and Dwayne take off. Rick takes care of the zombie. He shoots it. He presses his weapon against the zombie's head in doing so, which, okay, is effective. You're not going to miss that's not point blank range. That's like contact range. You're not going to miss, but at the same time, you're really at risk of getting things in the barrel of your weapon at that point, which is going to be more. It's going to need a good cleaning. Otherwise, it may not work properly, it may malfunction. It's not going to be as effective until it's clean. And Rick should know that. But even though there's things that we know, we sometimes make bad decisions. We don't think things through. We act just on impulse or emotion, and we make bad choices. This one didn't really have any ill effect for him. He uses his weapon again later on in the episode, if I remember right, and it's just fine. So maybe he cleaned it and they didn't show that. Whatever the case, it didn't have a negative effect in that instance, but it's one of those things that definitely possibly could have. Know what you're using and how to use it safely and properly and wisely. Back at their house, Dwayne and Morgan are enjoying some downtime. Dwayne is reading through his comic books. Morgan's looking through family pictures. Off where he's at, Rick is walking through nature. Again, these are normal things. These are fostering a feeling of normalcy. And in this case, it's good. There's a difference between normalcy bias and a feeling of normalcy when things are crazy and there's a disaster or emergency. That feeling of things aren't as bad. Things are normal, in the sense of, I've got time to read comic books. I'm a kid. I enjoy comic books. I'm reading my comic books. That's going to be healthy for him mentally and emotionally. Probably they brought those comic books with them. Obviously, Morgan brought his family pictures with him. If we have to evacuate, if you can do so safely, if you have the space, if you have the time, bring some of those important family things with you. Those things are really meaningful to you. Bring an item or a couple items that will help you relax, that will be comforting. Maybe a child has a favorite blanket, or a stuffed animal, a teddy bear or some other stuffy that that's really meaningful to them. Bring that. That again helps feel like things are normal, helps feel safe, and can go such a long way in ensuring that you can be a little bit more resilient and have a little bit more mental and emotional health and wellness. So Morgan goes up to the second floor. He pulls out his weapon and he starts shooting a couple zombies, trying to lure his wife out so he can put her out of her misery, so to speak. Dwayne hears the shots and starts to react. Morgan yells at him to stay downstairs. Dwayne starts rocking back and forth, covering his ears, talking quietly. I can't tell if he's just talking to himself or if he's praying, but what he's displaying there is again, a trauma response. He's trying to protect himself from what's going on around him because he's already been traumatized so much and he doesn't want to experience any more of that. And then Morgan finally has his wife in his sights and he can't pull the trigger. Sometimes there's things that we feel like we need to do or ought to do, and we can't bring ourselves to do them. And that's legit. That's something we all experience when we have those situations where we feel like we could have or should have done something and we weren't able to, whether it's just that we tried and failed or we just weren't able to bring ourselves even to try. It's important to be compassionate with yourself. It's important to be understanding and not be too hard on yourself. Be forgiving, be loving with yourself. That's really important. Then we transition, and Rick is on his CB while he's driving to Atlanta, trying to make contact with any other people that might be around. He's trying to make contacts, but also giving people a warning and sharing plans. Hey, I'm going to Atlanta. There's people in Atlanta, I hear. And if you're hearing this, come join us in Atlanta. This is going to be a safe place. Switch over to a camp and you see Shane and Carl and others, and they hear static on the radio, but occasionally they can hear Rick and his message coming through. They try and make contacts back with Rick and they're not able to. The CB just can't connect, whether it's a matter of power or whether it's range. Obviously, Rick is quickly out of range because they stop hearing Rick pretty quickly. Again, there's contrast between Rick and between Shane. Shane seems to be the leader in a lot of ways. And Shane says, oh, we're too busy to put up signs. We're too busy to do anything to contact others or warn them or communicate. Whereas Rick, he's sitting there blaring on his CB as he's driving along because it's important to him to communicate with others. Definitely a very different perspective and way of handling things. Also, it goes to show you the limitations sometimes of our communications technology. Radios can be misleading. If you're looking at like some two-way radios, something like that, to use hunting or put in your preparedness supplies or whatever the case may be, That packaging may say that they're good for 40 miles, but realistically, they might work for a range of like 2 or 3 miles because of interference, because of the lay of the land. And so you really need to take that into account when you're making your preparations, your communications planning, so that you don't get into a situation where you think you're going to be able to communicate over a long distance and then you find out you can't, because that's not getting any good. That's no bueno. That's going to be a really bad situation if you're needing to communicate and something like that. Lori gets mad at Shane and starts to walk off towards her tent. Shane follows her and reminds her of the safety practices that they have in place, that you're supposed to always go somewhere with someone else, buddy system. And he reminds her of her obligations as a mother, that she's got Carl to take care of. Obviously, those are important things to keep in mind. Use the buddy system if you're in a dangerous setting, even like at scout camp, where you're in a semi-enclosed area. I mean, you're in a controlled area. We were always told we needed to have a buddy when we went to use the bathroom, even in the middle of the night. If you could, take someone with you, to go water the trees or whatever you're doing. Buddy system can be really important in keeping safe. Carl comes quickly to check on his mom. She reassures him. She redirects him to his chores, actually. And he's good and goes off and does his chores. But again, she's trying to comfort him and help him to be in a position where he can be resilient and he can deal with things in a healthy manner. Even to that normalcy of, hey, you still got your chores to do. There may be different chores. It may look different. They may be done differently, but you still got your chores. And so, that was a good bit of mothering there for her to do. So Rick runs out of gas in his car. Again, I don't know why these cars don't have gas in them. So he runs out of gas, he walks to the farmhouse, and he announces himself to alert others to his presence and communicate with them. Also to protect himself, because by alerting others, he's not going to seem as much of a threat to them. And so that's going to reduce the risk of them trying to hurt him without talking to him first or figuring out who he is and what he's doing there. And there's no answer. He gets up to the house and he finds that the people inside are dead. He sees a truck, he goes over to it, checks for keys, doesn't find any, starts to walk off, whether it's back to the house or down the road or wherever he ends on going. He sees a horse. He goes and saddles up the horse and takes off on the horse towards Atlanta. So he's getting flexible. His plan A fell through and just driving that cruiser all the way into Atlanta and just cruising along. So his plan B, okay, I'm going to go see if I can get some gas from these people here at this farm. That didn't work out. People are dead. Oh, plan C. I'm going to see if I can use this vehicle of theirs. Don't generally advocate or support taking someone else's property. Property rights are really important. But in this situation, survival scenario, the family's not going to be using it anymore. So plan C, try and take their vehicle. He can't. Okay, starts to walk off. Hey, plan D, there's a horse. I'm going to saddle up this horse and I'm going to ride. He says it's been a long time since he's ridden a horse, but he's adapting. He's doing what he needs to. So good for him for being flexible and adaptable. That's a skill that will be huge. It's difficult to learn sometimes. A lot of people don't have that ability or desire to be flexible or adapt. And if that's not something that you're good at, consider trying to foster that and grow that within yourself. So he gets to Atlanta and it's just a scene of disaster. It shows them kind of a long distance shot, and he's trotting in or walking in on his horse up the freeway, and the freeway going into town is clear. Freeway coming out of town is just packed, like bumper to bumper, with vehicles that have been abandoned or the people driving them are dead or are zombified. Some places may actually open up the inbound lanes and turn them into outbound lanes. I've seen that happen. I believe places in the South will do that when there's a massive hurricane coming in, and that's something great to do. Obviously, it's good for Rick at that time that they didn't, because it made his passage up the freeway into Atlanta on that horse a lot easier than having to read through a bunch of stalled cars on that side of the freeway. But again, planning by the city companies, it's important to figure out how you're going to react to different things. So they get into the city, they see a bunch of broken cars, crashed cars, trucks, buses, tanks, helicopters even, many dead people and many zombies. Rick hears the helicopter and takes off in the direction that it's flying. They run into some large crowds of zombies. After trying to go this way and that way and trying to escape, finally the horse throws Rick and then falls down and then comes dinner for the zombies, which is sad. Rick is trying to escape from the horde of zombies, and so he goes under a tank to hide there. And zombies trying to follow him. And, these zombies may not be super fast, but they tend to be a little bit more flexible and agile in some ways than your stereotypical zombies. In addition to being a little bit more broad in what they eat, so these zombies are in some ways more dangerous than some of your stereotypical zombies in the literature out there. So Rick is really concerned and trying to figure out how he's going to survive, if he's going to survive, what actions to take. He looks up at one and he sees an open hatch in the bottom of the tank. So he climbs up in the tank and just kind of throws himself down to catch his breath and sit for a minute. He looks over at this soldier that he's next to and sees it moving, realizes it's a zombie. So when he sees it move, he pulls out his weapon and he shoots it point blank range. But with the situation of being in the tank, enclosed area, lots of metal, there's a lot of reverberation. The discharge causes his ears to ring severely. He gets disoriented. He experiences kind of some vertigo. He's just not doing well for a few minutes. Maybe that's what he would have needed to do, but he acted again out of instinct. He moved rashly to discharge that firearm there, rather than really taking stock of the situation and acting in an appropriate way to the situation. He may still have decided that discharging his weapon would have been the best way to go about things, but at least it would have been considered, and he maybe could have done something to reduce the noise of the discharge and make it a little bit better of a situation for himself. So he's trapped in the tank. He's trying to figure out what to do. Zombies under the tank. He's feeling trapped. Again, he's evaluating what to do, and a voice comes over the radio. The voice is really critical of him, kind of mocking him and not being very nice. But for Rick, it gives him a sense of hope. He's happy that there's someone out there that's reaching out to him and that he can touch base with, and hopefully they can help him and him help them or get information from them or whatever the case may be, which is a really good example of how we choose our own reactions to things. Whatever stimuli is out there, whether it's someone mocking us, someone trolling on social media, someone tailgating us, someone mansplaining, all kinds of different situations. We choose how we react to those. We may have an instinctive reaction, a first just reaction, but whether we choose to let that reaction stay, whether we choose to foster that, or whether we choose to let that pass by us and engage in a healthier response, that is our choice. And by our actions and our choices over time, we help to guide how we will respond instinctively to things, and we can minimize those responses to things. Good example of Rick. He's getting this negative verbal feedback from this person on the radio, but he chooses to see the positive in it. Good for Rick for that. That takes a certain mindset to do. So good for him. And thus ends the episode. So like I said, season 1, episode 1, there's a whole lot of preparedness lessons in here, different principles that are shown, some of them multiple times, but there's a lot that we can learn from it. I may continue to do some more episodes of Walking Dead. I've also thought of some other movies and television shows or episodes that we can look at. I don't have the next one picked out yet, but hey, I will try to let you know what those are ahead of time. So maybe you can watch them or read a book or listen to the music or whatever, but you can come prepared to hear that next episode. And so you can participate and leave comments. And if there's things I've missed or you disagree and think, oh, no, this was actually a smart thing he did, when I'm a little bit critical of it, share that with me. That would be great. I'd love to have that back and forth and that exchange, the interaction between us. Like I said, I will try to let you know what those are ahead of time once I start picking those out, planning them out a little bit more. So let me know if you've enjoyed this episode. It's a little bit of a long one. I have no idea what time we're at, but hopefully this has been fun for you as well as been of value and benefit. I do want to remind you one more time about Magic Mind. If you're interested in trying Magic Mind, go to www.magicmind.co. That's co/LLPHP, and then do your shopping, enter LLPHP 20 at checkout, and that'll get you 20% off your first purchase. Again, I really recommend Magic Mind. I think it's a magically great product. Yeah, so if you've enjoyed this, like, share, comment, subscribe. You know all the things that we encourage you to do that help us in the algorithms and engagement and things like that. So we'll let you do what you see fit there. I appreciate any support that you can give in whatever means. Again, I hope this has been valuable to you. as well as fun. If you'd like to learn more about preparedness, I do have the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness Project Preparedness Coaching Program coming out here in the very near future. You want to be more prepared? Message me, email me, contact@llphp.org, or message me on social media. Love to help you be more prepared through that coaching program. I can't say for sure that it's the first preparedness coaching program in the US or anywhere, but I get the impression that if there are others out there, they're very few. So this is a great opportunity for you. If you're at the beginning of your preparedness journey, come find out how through preparedness, you can be more empowered and you can be a hero for yourself and for those around you, those you love. Again, love is why I do this. I love you all. I appreciate you being here and listening, taking the time, spending the time to listen. And I will leave you in love and liberty and talk to you next time. Thank you.